Amandla. Viva EFF, viva. Viva EFF, viva. Viva EFF, viva. Long live the Commander-in-Chief, long live. Long live the Commander-in-Chief, long live. Forward to true freedom, forward. Forward to total freedom, forward. Forward to total emancipation, forward. Amandla. Away to. No, thank you very much, Chairperson of the EFF here in the province of the Eastern Cape, and the Chairperson of the region, and the branch conveners and coordinators and branch elections task forces of the EFF here in King Sabata Dalindebo municipality, sub-region, and all of us who are here. The most important acknowledgement we must make is of ourselves, the ground forces of the economic freedom fighters. I see that there are fighters here who do not have t-shirts of the EFF, and I don't understand why they don't have t-shirts of the EFF. So let's have an agreement and contract that by the end of this political lecture, all of us must be looking the same with the idea of the economic freedom fighters. But only with an understanding that once you wear a t-shirt of the EFF, you must know that you are now joining a battalion of ground forces of the EFF who must be able to defend and speak about the t-shirt that you are wearing. In the EFF, we do not use t-shirts to try to win over people to the EFF. We give t-shirts to converted soldiers and ground forces, whom when people ask you about the t-shirt you are wearing, everywhere you are able to explain it. To say that this is a revolutionary regalia, is an expression of determination, is an expression of courage, because the only summary that we can give about what the economic freedom fighters is that it is the most brave and courageous movement that is confronting not just the politicians who are opponents, that is confronting the white capitalist establishment that is ruling South Africa. So all of us must be in a better position to speak about and defend the t-shirt of the EFF. We have never used t-shirts to persuade any voter as the economic freedom fighters. And we are 1.8 million people who are proven from 2019 who voted for the EFF. And we believe that when we go to these elections on the 29th of May, it will be majority of those who are registered to vote who are going to vote for the economic emancipation movement. Now, fighters, we said we are going to have this public address on the 30 years of the so-called freedom, because tomorrow, the 27th of April 2024, South Africa will be marking exactly 30 years since the first inclusive elections, where there were so many people who were now allowed to vote, who for more than 300 years since the colonial invasion of South Africa were not allowed to participate in its political and economic life. So 1994 represented a different era in the politics of South Africa, because black people were now allowed to vote after they were denied their right to participate in the lives of their own country. And why is this important? Is that all the time, as revolutionary activists and fighters of the EFF, we need to pause. We need to just take a moment to reflect on where do we come from, so that we can have a clear perspective of where we are going. So you know, one of South Africa's most outstanding revolutionaries who died when he was still youth the founding president of the Congress Youth League called Anton Muziwake Lambede, once said that one who wants to create the future must not forget the past. So if you want to create a clearly defined future, you must know just where do you come from, what were the circumstances that defined you before you were even born. Because everything else that defines us as young people, that defines us as South Africans, is not a subject of our own making. It's a subject of history. The fact that we stay here in KSD, those of you who come from KSD in OR Tambo region, the fact that we stay in the village where you come from or the township where you come from is not out of your own making. It's a creation of history. The fact that coincidentally, everyone else who looks like me and you is nowhere closer to be richer or even much more comfortable than the white minorities is not out of our own creation. It's a creation of history. But history is not something that we just live in the past. It's something that we analyze so that we can be able to characterize and define where we are so that we can know where we are going. So today we're just going to give a brief sketch of where do we come from as this country called South Africa today. Or is this place which is called South Africa, where do we come from? What are the politics of South Africa? And one thing, fighters, which we want to at least assure you on is that when you attend political gatherings and listen to political speeches, you must never be worried. You must never be too concerned that some of the words, some of the phrases that are being used there are sounding very difficult. It starts like that. You start by beginning to appreciate that this is what is said, and with time, you will get to have a full appreciation of everything else that is being said in politics. And you will even yourself be able to speak about the politics of South Africa, the politics of your locality, the international politics as well. And I'm saying this with utmost confidence and knowledge because, like majority of us, we grew up ourselves in areas that did not have any access to any information. We came from high schools that did not have electricity, that never had libraries, that never had internet, that never had anything. Actually, it was even worse for those of us, the last generation, to live without cell phones. For those of us who went to high schools in the early 90s, there were no cell phones, there was no internet. So we did not have access to as much information as this current generation has. So you must never ever get worried if in the process of talking about where we come from, there are certain things that you will not understand. Time will heal all of those things. Time will correct that, and in the immediate future you will be able to articulate just what is this thing called South Africa and how do we transform it? How do we reposition it to be a country that benefits all its inhabitants, all the people who stay in it, meaningfully, particularly from the side of the economy. Now, I had already said that tomorrow marks exactly 30 years since 1994. And the EFF Students Command and majority of young people in South Africa have been saying 2024 is our 1994, because that basically is an expression of determination to change the political landscape of South Africa from the 29th of May onwards. So if April 27, 1994 was Freedom Day, the 29th of May 2024 must be Economic Freedom Day. Must be a day where we declare economic freedom, the beginning of a journey for economic emancipation for all the people of South Africa. So before fighters, the arrival of the colonial settlers, the white colonial settlers in this area which we call South Africa today, black people, the people who look like me and you, the indigenous Africans, were living in all the parts of this country, everywhere. And they had an organized social and economic life. They were, of course, led by traditional leaders. They had their own systems of government. They had their own systems of economy. They had their own systems of hunting. They were not living in poverty. Which animals were dangerous and which ones were not. They knew which animals could be domesticated and which ones could not be domesticated. In actual fact, if you read deeply into South Africa's history, before the arrival of colonialists, black people even knew about the mineral wealth beneath South Africa's soil. They knew how to extract the gold and even trade with many other parts of the world. The international trade that got to be intensified after the discovery of diamonds in Kimberley and gold in Johannesburg had already been there even before the colonialists arrived here. And in the year 1510, it's a long time ago, there was an attempt to colonize this place called South Africa today by a Portuguese colonialist called Francisco de Almeida. He tried to take over this territory because that de Almeida is the one who got to settle and colonize the country we call Mozambique today. That is why Mozambique, if you go to Mozambique, majority of the people in Mozambique still speaks Portuguese. It's a Portugal colony. Then he tried to colonize this place called South Africa, but was defeated and killed by the indigenous South Africans who said no to colonialism. They said, we don't mind visitors. You can visit, but you can't be a visitor and you want to own our land. You can't be a visitor and you want to set the rules for us. You can't be a visitor and want to be the boss of everything, who tells us how to behave and how to deal with everything. And from that period, since the defeat of the first attempt of colonialism, there were never any other attempts of colonizing or taking over this place we call South Africa until 1652, when the Dutch government, the government of Netherlands, so Netherlands is called Dutchland. It's sometimes called, it's Dutchland, it's Netherlands, it's Holland, the country called Holland. That is where the Afrikaners came from. They then took a group of criminals, convicted criminals, and put them in a voyage to say that you as criminals, because you have been convicted here, you must go and look for a territory to conquer. And then they then took that voyage led by a person called Jan van Riebeeck. And then they settled in the Cape. That was then the beginning of the colonization of South Africa. Most history books in South Africa tell a wrong story that the history of South Africa only started in 1652. In most history lessons, they always portray a picture as if we started in 1652. We did not start in 1652. This country has always been there, long before 1652. Our people have always been there. Of course, it was not called South Africa, it was called different names. And then in 1652, the colonial settlers came, and then they got to colonize our people. They defeated our people because they had military superiority and they had a government which was supporting them, of Holland. And then they settled here from 1652 onwards. In the 1800s, the British government, the English-speaking Britain, the United Kingdom, said, it looks like this area is beautiful, let us go and take it away from the Dutch or from the Holland people. And then they came to take over in 1806, the Cape Colony, to take it by force from the Dutch settlers, the colonial settlers. And why did Britain take that? Is because at that period, Britain was the biggest dominant force all over the world. So if you check in the history of the world, there was a time where Greece was the dominant force all over the world, which determined everything else that happens all over the world. There was a time where Rome was a dominant force all over the world. There was a time where Spain was a dominant force all over the world. There was a time where Portugal was a dominant force all over the world. And at the time they took over the Cape Colony, the British were a dominant force in the world. So those of you who are still in university, when you study further, you will come across something called the hegemonic stability theory, which means that at almost all given moments, you will find one country which is dominant over society. Currently in the world, the dominant force is still the United States of America, but that domination is coming to an end and might be replaced by the People's Republic of China, or might be replaced by a multipolarity or multiple sources of dominance, not just one country. So when the British took over the Cape Colony from the Dutch settlers, who had now stayed here in South Africa, and they had mixed with indigenous people, and they had mixed their language, the Dutch language, with some of the local dialects, and then they developed the language of Afrikaans, a nation of Afrikaners. They then decided that these people are taking over our territory. Let us move further up from the Cape, which is on the coastal areas. The southernmost tip of South Africa, they said, let us go to the north, maybe we'll get something. And then they got to engage fighters, let us be patient. They then got to engage in something called the Great Trek, where they went to move into the inner part of South Africa. And everywhere they were going, they were meeting our people, black people, our forefathers. And they were engaged in battles, wars, and almost, if not all, the wars that were fought against the colonial settlers. We as black people were defeated, we were conquered by the white colonial settlers. As a result, they took our land, they took our minerals, they took our animals, they took everything that rightfully belonged to us. And since that conquest, in the 1800s, in the 1900s, we have not yet recovered as black people who are still conquered, because we have not yet regained our land. We are still under the economic domination of the white colonial settlers. And there have been attempts to fight back to retain and return our land. But it has not yet been successful. We are still a conquered people. And how do you see that? If you check the patterns of land ownership in South Africa, is that the descendants, the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the colonial settlers are still in ownership of 8% of South Africa's land. And then they pushed us to areas which they never found productive. That is why I started by saying that the fact that you stay here in Mthatha, in Mkanduli, or in the border, or wherever, it's not out of your own making. It's a history that was created by the colonial settlers. And that is a journey that you must understand, that the battle that we are taking as the EFF is not our battle. In the founding manifesto of the EFF, we say we acknowledge the struggles that were fought by those who came before us. We are just taking a baton and continuing with the struggle. We do not claim to be the inventors of the struggle against colonialism and land dispossession. And after the so-called Great Trek, where the Afrikaners were moving inland, what became a final settlement was the creation of 4 colonies, or 4 areas, 4 provinces, or semi-provinces in South Africa, which became constituting of what today is the Western Cape, Eastern Cape, and Northern Cape. And then the second one was the Transvaal, constituted of what is today Gauteng, Mpumalanga, Limpopo, and Northwest. And then Natal, which is currently KwaZulu-Natal. And then there was also the Orange River Colony, which is currently the Free State. 4 territories. And the Transvaal and the Orange Free State were controlled by the Afrikaans-speaking Boers. And the Cape and Natal were controlled by English-speaking white settlers. And in the late 1800s, the white people fought amongst themselves. There was a huge war in South Africa of white colonial settlers, which was called the Anglo-Boer War. But it was not truly an Anglo-Boer war. It was a war which involved a lot of black people who got to be co-opted by either side of the white colonial settlers. And what they ultimately agreed on was that let us stop the war and we must commonly oppress black people. Let us unite the 4 colonies and form one country which will be based on the common oppression, exclusion, and exploitation of black people. So the foundation of South Africa was on the common agreement amongst white settlers to oppress black people, to treat them as subhumans. That is why, since the formation of South Africa in 1910, there was never permission of black people to participate in elections. They actually said, let us subdivide them and give them their own small tribal areas. And then if they come to where we stay, they must stay in the townships, and the houses that they stay in must not be that comfortable, so that later on, when they are old, they must go back to the villages to die. So we were just treated historically as black people, as appendages of the white capitalist establishment and system. That is where this country comes from. And when the whites were having an agreement, they even segregated as to where authority should be. Here in South Africa, then they said Pretoria will be the capital in terms of the administration of the country. They said Cape Town will be the legislative capital where the laws are made. And then they say Bloemfontein, on behalf of the Orange River Colony, will be the judicial capital. That is why the Supreme Court of Appeal is still in Bloemfontein today. So we have inherited an agreement of white people, and we still continue with it. And after 1910 formation of the Union of South Africa, once white fought, and then they came to an agreement that they must commonly oppress all of us. There was then a reaction which led to the formation of the South African Native National Congress, which is called the ANC. We must talk about that so that all of us know what happened. When it was formed, they were trying to react to the formation of the Union of South Africa, which was a white-only government. But when the SANC was formed, it was not to say we want equal rights. It was not demanding one person, one food. It was formed to say that the chiefs and the educated black male said that can we at least accommodate some of us? Just allow some of us to participate in your white-owned government. And they were not even confrontational. They used to write letters, ask for meetings. They used to only go to the Queen in England to ask that they must allow South Africa to give them some participation as educated black men. So the foundation of what is the ANC today was not for the liberation of all people. It was just for the liberation of few individuals, of the upper middle class. And we know that the struggle continued many times without any signs of success. What became the turning point in the history of South Africa was in 1944. 1944, young people within the South African National Congress formed a Congress Youth League whose slogan and motto was freedom in our lifetime. And you must take note of that because we, the EFF, now says economic freedom in our lifetime. The Congress in 1944 said freedom in our lifetime. And who were those people? It was Anton Musiwake the man, it was Collins Majogo, it was Congress Bart, it was A.P. Dar. It was Oliver Reginald Tambo, whose this ridge is named after. It was Nelson Mandela. It was Walter Sisulu. It was a generation that said, we can't continue to submit ourselves to a colonial government, to a white-owned government. Let us confront the regime through defiance campaign. Let us also take up arms to fight physically for our own freedom and liberation. You know, as part of that generation, there was a leader called Robert Risha, who said at that time that the young revolutionaries of that time must never be scared to kill. He said as a revolutionary at that time, you must get used to the concept of murder. You must be able to confront the enemy, you must be fearless. Because they were saying that these people are using violence to suppress all of us. They are using intimidation to rule over black people. And they are not even more than 5% of the population. But they are in charge of our lives. Let's fight back so that we can take this out. That struggle only gained fruition in 1994 when only political freedom was attained. And as part of the 1944 generation of freedom in our lifetime, they are the ones who started the defiance campaign when they defied all colonial and apartheid laws. They are the ones who say the Freedom Charter must adopt it. The Freedom Charter says no government must claim authority over the people unless it is elected by all of them. The Freedom Charter also says the mineral wealth beneath the soil, the banks, and monopoly industry shall be transferred to the ownership of the people as a whole. The Freedom Charter also says the doors of learning and culture shall be opened to all by means of giving free quality education to everyone. That is what it says. But there was amongst those who started in the Congress Youth League, there was Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, who said this Freedom Charter is a sell-out position. Why? Because it starts by saying South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. And Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, one of the greatest revolutionaries, the most outstanding and most clear revolutionary, said that you cannot ascribe to a document that say South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. Because this country, South Africa, is our country as black people, and we must not try to create an impression that it also belongs to white people. That was Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe in 1948, 1949. And he later on started the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, which is the PAC now. And because apartheid was scared of Robert Sobukwe, they arrested him and isolated him from the whole of society. Even in prison, Robert Sobukwe was not allowed to interact with anyone because they were very scared of his ideas. They said this one is much more of a threat to the system than Nelson Mandela, than the rest of them. Robert Sobukwe was much more feared by the colonial and apartheid government than any of the generation of the Congress with me, because he was not sacrificing principles on the altar of political convenience. One thing, fighters, which is worth mentioning is that when the Freedom Charter was adopted, the apartheid government arrested everyone who had a copy of the Freedom Charter or was subscribing to the Freedom Charter. And they charged them on something called the treason prayer. 156 leaders were arrested, but majority were acquitted and left to go. And in 1960, when there was a defiance campaign which was led by the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania of Robert Sobukwe in Sharpeville, Gauteng province now, the apartheid government killed 69 people, defenseless and harmless people, with automatic rifles, for saying that we cannot go around killing the passbooks. As a result, the revolutionaries within the movement, the liberation struggle, said that we are going to take up arms and fight against the regime because it is using guns to fight against our people. That is how Umkhonto we Sizwe was formed on the 16th of December 1961. Not Umkhonto we Sizwe of a political party now. Umkhonto we Sizwe of guns, which was saying we're going to liberate South Africa through the barrel of a gun. The challenge with Umkhonto we Sizwe, which was formed in 1961, it had a different military philosophy and principle. They said instead of killing white people back who are killing us, let us just go and bomb power stations and bomb infrastructure, bridges of apartheid. Let us not kill people. With apartheid was killing black people. Umkhonto we Sizwe says, no, we are moralists. We are not going to kill back, we are just going to bomb bridges. As a result, the apartheid government did not have any fear, or they never got intimidated. They never got any pressure from Umkhonto we Sizwe, the military wing of the liberation movement. They knew it's a small group of people who majority of times were singing in exile there. Singing revolutionary songs but without action, chanting slogans, threatening that they are going to shoot everyone, but they never shot anyone. Singing about AK-47s every day, but they never confronted the regime. They of course will tell a different history of it because they don't want to confront the fact that they were not a threat at all to the apartheid regime. What then led to the end of apartheid, I'm going to close now so that you understand these things clearly, was that when a lot of political leaders were arrested because of the formation of Umkhonto we Sizwe, which included Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu. Nelson Mandela spent 18 years in prison and 9 years in a house in Cape Town. He was 18 years in Robben Island, and then the other years he was in a house in Cape Town. And then a lot of leaders were exiled, meaning that they were living in many other parts of the world. Then young people here in South Africa are the ones who say, we are going to fight against the regime. At the forefront of that struggle that grew and had huge impact here in South Africa was Steve Biko, who led an organization called the South African Students Organization, SASO. SASO was not just a student organization. You must go and study Steve Biko and check at what age did he die. Far much earlier in the age category which majority of you are. Steve Biko was a real threat to the apartheid regime. In his 20s, they were fearful of him. They were fearful of Steve Biko than they were fearful of Nelson Mandela, of Oliver Tambo. The apartheid feared Steve Biko than they would be scared of Oliver Tambo. Because he led a generation of militant, black conscious generation that confronted the regime. Although he was a student, the SASO led the whole of South Africa in the resistance against apartheid. And the levels of political consciousness and awareness that was raised by the Black Consciousness Movement under Stephen Biko also went to high schools. That all the students who were in high schools began to say, we are now politically conscious because of the leadership of Steve Biko, who comes from Ginsberg, comes from King Williamstown, here in the Eastern Cape. And then 1976, after the passing of a law that said English is going to be banned in all high schools and education system, the Afrikaners were saying we're going to teach everything in Afrikaans now. Then there was a student uprising in Soweto, which was opposing the imposition of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. The militancy of those students led to the apartheid regime going to go and kill defenseless young children in ages of 14, 15, 16, 18. A lot of them were killed, but the 1976 June 16 uprising led to many other uprisings in the whole of South Africa. Young people began to confront apartheid symbols and apartheid in everywhere where it was found and found expression. Solomon Masango, who many people speak about as having been a hero in the liberation struggle, is a product of the 1976 generation. Tsietsi Mashinini led from the front. Onkgopotso-Tiro, you must check who Onkgopotso-Tiro is. And there's a fighter called Khotso Siyahlulwa, who was part of the Soweto students movement, who said that let us go to exile as students to come back and fight the apartheid. Let us go and arm ourselves to come and fight these people. And then when they said Khotso Siyahlulwa, why don't we go and join the ANC or the PAC in exile? He says, those people have been in exile since the early 60s. But there is nothing that they've done for us. There is no resistance that they've shown for us. And then Khotso Siyahlulwa went to start a military wing to say, before he was even the age of 23, he said, let us form as young people a military wing to fight against apartheid. If they use guns against us, we must use guns against them. The impact of 1976 led to a situation where rolling mass actions and militancy against apartheid was rising amongst young people. And apartheid capitalists began to say, it looks like we must allow this apartheid to go because there is so much instability here in South Africa, caused by young people, by the younger generation. So revolutions by nature are activities that are led by young people. That is why the EFF is a revolutionary movement, because it was founded and still led by relatively young people. It's not led by people in their 60s who always forget everything else that they do and say. So part of the reason apartheid began to unbundle was the impact of June 16, 1976. In 1985, the apartheid government declared a state of emergency to say that we are no longer using the laws to arrest everyone we suspect of being a revolutionary activist against apartheid. They jailed thousands of young people. As a result, the entire international community, the second reason why apartheid got to be unbundled, the international community began to isolate South Africa. There were campaigns all over the world of isolation of the South African apartheid government in sports, in social gatherings, on everything. The United Nations even declared apartheid a crime against humanity. And the international isolation of South Africa even put more pressure on South Africa. Now, apartheid soldiers, they were now saying that it looks like we're going to lose power. They were then going to these exile camps and the countries which were hosting the exile liberation forces and armed forces. They said we're going to fight them in the countries where they are exiled. So apartheid used to cause conflict in all the countries in the African continent which were hosting Umkhonto weSizwe and the Azanian People's Liberation Army, which was the military wing of the PAC. So they will go to Mozambique and sponsor conflict in Mozambique between the ruling party of Frelimo and a rebel group of Renamo. They tried to do that in Zimbabwe after Zimbabwe gained liberation in 1980. They tried to cause conflict between ZANU and ZAPU. Then they went to Angola to try to support Jonas Savimbi of a party called UNITA against the MPLA, which was government. When they went to try to cause conflict in Angola, the counteract in Angola, the Cuban government, the government of Cuba is very far from the African continent. Cuba is somewhere close to America. Actually, to take a flight from Cuba in Havana to California in America is less than an hour. But the Cubans say that we are going to fight on the side of African revolutionary movements and defend their freedom and fight with them against apartheid South Africa. Because apartheid South Africa was being supported by colonialists, was being supported by the British, by the Americans, despite apartheid being declared a crime against humanity. Then in 1985-1986, there was now a battle in a small town in Angola called Cuito, Cuanavale. So you must do research about something called the Battle of Cuito, Cuanavale. A lot of books have been written about that. That Battle of Cuito, Cuanavale is part of the reasons why South Africa had the 27th of April 1994. You must pay attention, this is very important. The apartheid government sent the white soldiers to Angola to fight against the MPLA, to fight against the Cubans who are now reinforcing the MPLA. And a lot of apartheid soldiers were killed because the Cubans had military superiority. And at that time, Namibia was still a colony as well, was not liberated. When apartheid realized that they are losing the battle, in the battle side, they are losing lots of lives. They then went to negotiate with Angola, with Cuba, and they brought in America as a mediator. And the resolution of that negotiation after the war, after the Battle of Cuito, Cuanavale, was that Namibia must be granted its own independence. And that they must start a process of negotiating in South Africa to give South Africa its own independence from apartheid. That is why Namibia was liberated and declared its independence from 1989-1990. And in honor of the Cuban soldiers who fought for the liberation of Namibia, the commanders who were commanding the Cubans in Cuito, Cuanavale, were the ones giving the keynote speech on the Freedom Day of Namibia. And then South Africa's negotiations for freedom started after that reality. The release of political prisoners in 1990, Nelson Mandela, the unbending of political parties, was a result of Cuito, Cuanavale. But in the middle of all of those things, the countries began to isolate ANC leaders and want to say to them that we can give you political power, but we're going to retain the economy. So stop these things of freedom, charter of the mineral wealth must belong to the people as a whole. Just take political office and we must keep the economy. The Condesa negotiations and the conclusion was exactly what the white people wanted. And an agreement was reached in 1992, December 1993. They even had a draft constitution to say, we are now ready to move on to freedom. We are now ready to move into a place where all people will vote, one person, one vote. But they then said that we can't go to elections because we've got one problem. That is the white colonial centers. They say we can't go to elections because there's one problem. And the problem was Martin Tebisi Chris. They said we can't go to elections because this Chris is not part of this agreement that was signed. And Chris Hani is very popular amongst the youth. Chris Hani represents the future. There is no one who is popular than Chris Hani. If Nelson Mandela goes anywhere, he's too old. When Chris Hani comes, he's going to take our economy. And we have agreed we're just going to give you political power, the economy will continue to own. They were very clear that let transition happens and we'll continue to do business as usual. And that is why they had to deal with the Christian question. And on the 10th of April 1993, they killed Christian. They assassinated him. Of course, those who are said to have killed him were arrested. Clive David Lewis and Janus Wanus is still released now. But it is not possible that it was just two people who plotted the murder and assassination of Chris Hani. It's not possible. It's time two individuals who decided that Chris Hani must die. There are so many people inside the ANC and within the apartheid government who had consensus on the killing of his son, because they said it was a blockage to this project of taking political power without economic power.
Yes.
That is why when Chris Hani was killed, Nelson Mandela went on national television and all radio stations and said, this is an opportunity now to declare the date of elections. And the 27th of April 1994 was declared as a day where elections in South Africa were going to be held. And elections were of course held. And South Africa took political power amongst black people, but the economy remained in white people's hands. And even when you check in terms of the cabinet of President Mandela, the Minister of Land under President Mandela was Clive Nicholas from the National Party. The Minister of Finance was Derek Keys from the National Party. The Minister of Mineral Resources was Pete Walker from the National Party. So minerals, the land and finance, the core components of the economy were given to white minority by President Mandela to demonstrate that they were just saying, give us political power and we will contain the economy. And that is why South Africa never got to liberate economically black people, because the economy was taken in the hands of white colonial settlers. When we were now reflecting towards the 20th of South Africa's so-called freedom, we as a generation of economic freedom fighters made the correct analysis that this political power without economic power is meaningless. It means absolutely nothing. And that is the basis upon which the economic freedom fighters was founded. On the basis that political power without economic power is meaningless. So the EFF was founded as an economic emancipation movement. A political party whose primary aim is to fight for economic power. That is why at the center of our programs is the expropriation of land without compensation for equal redistribution. It's the nationalization of mines, banks, and other strategic sectors of the economy. It's massive protected industrial development to create millions of jobs. It's building state capacity with the aim of abolishing tenders. Is the development of the African economy, because we appreciate that we can't just develop in the corner when the entire economy of the African continent is not developed. At the center of our struggle is the provision of free quality decolonized higher education, provision of free quality healthcare and sanitation for all. But also we appreciate as one of the pillars that we should fight corruption. We must have an open, accountable government that is currently held to account by the people. This Freedom Day, which we are made to celebrate every 27th of April, is not true freedom. It cannot be true freedom. Majority of black people in black areas do not have quality supply of water. So what is freedom without water? A lot of our people do not have electricity. They do not have access to quality education. And the freedom that we should be fighting for, the true emancipation that we must be fighting for, is what is contained in the founding manifesto and the election manifestos of the EFF. That is why fighters, all of us, we must not underestimate the significance of the 29th of May. All of us must go on the ground to say that on the 29th of May, we're going to declare true freedom for the people of South Africa. Not this fake freedom which we 1994. But 8 years later, they have not brought us anything. They will go around you here on radio or TV. They say there was a peaceful transition in South Africa in 1994. There was no peaceful transition. A lot of black people were killed. But they say it is peaceful because no white person was killed when the transition was happening. Between 1992 when political prisoners were released and 1994 when the elections, more than 20,000 black people died because of politics. But they say it's peaceful transition because no white person was killed. So there was no peaceful transition in South Africa. There is no rainbow nation in South Africa. We were sold the dime of political power without economic power. And as a generation, we have an obligation to change that. That is why we say 2024 must be our 1994 because it is going to bring us true freedom, not fake freedom, which we are made to celebrate without any material benefit out of it. True freedom must lead to the material changes in the conditions of our people. And this freedom that was brought by the ANC, or is said to have been brought by the ANC, is not giving meaningful value to the lives of our people. Fighters, that is the line that we want to speak about today, and we have to of course do this because all of us must appreciate, like Anthony Lambert, where we come from, so that we can know where we are going. The last issue, fighters, is that all of us, every day, let us go and speak to our people. Let us tell them about the real Freedom Day, which is the 29th of May 2024. Let's go and persuade our brothers and sisters, our cousins. Let's go and talk to our mothers, our grandparents, our fathers, everyone, to say that let us not miss this opportunity to bring true freedom to South Africa. We must not miss this opportunity to bring back the land, to bring back our minerals. Because the ones who are in power now are not going to do anything. If anything, those who are in power are nothing but puppets of the colonial ancestors. So fighters, let's fight on because victory is certain. Amanda! Forward to true freedom, forward! Forward to true freedom, forward! Viva EFF, viva! Viva EFF, viva! Viva EFF, viva! Amanda! Away two! Batulenje vasitiniso Aulendao Sikukuyo Batulenje vasitiniso Aulendao Sikukuyo Batulenje vasitiniso Aulendao Sikukuyo Bapetes pames futumlilo Aulendao Sikukuyo Batulenje vasitiniso Aulendao Sikukuyo Amanda Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Deputy President. That was so enriching.